Welcome back to ABA Chapter Chat. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into something you might not expect.
Oh,
The intersection of government and law
okay.
with the principles of applied behavior analysis.
Interesting.
It might sound strange at first, but
Yeah.
trust me, understanding how governments and legal systems use behavioral principles can give us some amazing insights into how societies function.
That's right. We often think about ABA in terms of individual behavior change.
Right.
But its principles are at play in much larger systems, too.
It's like zooming out the camera lens, right?
Exactly.
We're used to looking at how ABA works with one person, but now we're seeing those same ideas operate on a massive scale.
Exactly. So let's start by thinking about what government actually is from an ABA perspective.
Okay.
At its core, it's a system designed to manage and control behavior, just on a much larger scale than we typically work with.
So instead of working with one client, the government's client is the entire population.
Yes.
That's a pretty big responsibility.
It is, and it's not just about laws and punishment either, though
Right.
those are certainly important parts of it.
Okay.
Governments use a whole range of behavioral techniques to influence the actions of their citizens.
That makes sense. I mean, even in our individual work, we know punishment isn't always the most effective strategy.
Right.
So what else is in the government's toolkit?
Well, just like we might use positive reinforcement with a client,
Uh-huh.
governments use things like incentives and rewards to encourage certain behaviors.
Okay.
Think about tax breaks for businesses that adopt green practices or subsidies for families to make their homes energy efficient.
Oh, okay.
Those are all examples of positive reinforcement in action.
Ah, so instead of just punishing people for polluting, they're rewarding them for making environmentally friendly choices.
Exactly.
It's like a carrot and stick approach on a societal level.
Exactly, and those economic incentives can be very powerful in shaping behavior.
Yeah.
Governments can also use things like public awareness campaigns,
Uh-huh.
educational programs, or even simple nudges to encourage people to make healthier choices or act in ways that benefit the community.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about laying down the law, it's about understanding how to motivate people to follow it by making the desired behavior more appealing or beneficial.
Right.
I'm starting to see the connections here.
Absolutely. And speaking of the law, that's another area where ABA principles are really evident.
Okay?
Laws themselves can be thought of as codified contingencies of reinforcement.
Okay.
They lay out specific behaviors and the consequences for those behaviors,
Uh-huh.
shaping our understanding of what's acceptable and what's not.
So it's like a giant official set of if-then statements.
Precisely.
If you speed, then you get a ticket.
Yes,
If you pay your taxes, then you avoid penalties.
Right.
It's all spelled out in advance.
precisely. And our obedience to the law is shaped by both direct experience with those consequences
Okay.
and through indirect learning by observing what happens to others.
Oh, interesting.
We see people getting rewarded for following the rules, and we see people getting punished for breaking them,
Right.
and that helps guide our own choices.
It's social learning in action, right?
Exactly.
We don't even have to experience the consequence ourselves to understand that it's something we want to avoid or seek out.
Right.
It's like that old saying, learn from the mistakes of others.
Exactly, but it's not just about avoiding punishment.
Right.
We also see people being recognized for their good deeds or benefiting from following the rules, and that reinforces those behaviors as well.
Uh-huh.
It's a constant interplay between individual actions, societal expectations,
Yeah.
and the systems that are in place to maintain order.
Okay, this is making me rethink my whole understanding of how society works.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about laws being written down. It's about understanding the behavioral principles behind them and how those principles shape our choices on a daily basis.
Right. And that's where it gets really interesting for us as ABA professionals.
Yeah.
Because if we understand these dynamics, we can start to think about how to use our knowledge to improve these systems, to
No.
make them more effective, more ethical,
Right.
and more beneficial for everyone.
This is blowing my mind a little bit, I have to admit. I'm already seeing so many connections to our work with individual clients, but on this much grander scale.
Right.
It's like having a secret decoder ring for understanding the world around us.
That's a great way to put it. But before we get too carried away with our newfound decoder rings,
Okay.
we need to acknowledge that there are some important nuances and complexities to this whole thing.
Great. I'm all ears. What are we missing?
Well, we've been talking about government as a monolithic entity,
Uh-huh.
but in reality, it's made up of countless individuals, each with their own motivations and biases.
Right.
And the same goes for the population they're trying to govern.
Yeah.
Not everyone responds to the same incentives or punishments in the same way.
So it's not as simple as saying, if we just implement this law, everyone will behave this way.
Not at all. Human behavior is incredibly complex, and there are always going to be unpredictable factors at play.
Right.
Plus, we have to consider the ethical implications of using behavioral principles to influence people's choices,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to something as powerful as government.
This is getting deep. I'm realizing there's so much more to unpack here.
There is, but that's what makes this exploration.
Right, and I'm already starting to see the world in a new light. Everywhere I look now, I see those principles of reinforcement punishment and modeling playing out in all sorts of subtle ways.
It's like you've unlocked a new level of awareness, and that's exactly what we want to do with this deep dive, to help you see those connections between ABA principles
Right?
and the larger systems that shape our lives.
So let's talk more about those systems.
Yeah,
You mentioned that things aren't always so straightforward when you're dealing with something as complex as government.
absolutely. We have to remember that governments are made up of people.
Yeah.
And people don't always behave in perfectly rational or predictable ways.
Right.
Plus, different societies have different values, cultures, and historical contexts, all of which influence how they approach issues of governance and behavior change.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not like there's a one-size-fits-all solution for every society or every problem.
Exactly. So let's take a closer look at some of the specific challenges that governments face when they try to apply behavioral principles on a large scale.
Okay.
One of the biggest one is the sheer diversity of the population they're trying to influence.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a big hurdle. That works for one group of people might not work for another.
Right.
And there's no way to create a system that caters to every individual's needs and preferences.
Right, and that's where the concept of countercontrol comes in. Remember, we talked about how governments exert control through laws, incentives, and social norms.
Yeah.
But individuals and groups also have ways to push back against that control,
Okay.
to shape the system to better meet their needs or to resist policies they see as unjust.
So it's not just a one-way street. Citizens have agency too.
Absolutely. Think about things like voting, protesting,
Oh, wow.
organizing advocacy groups, or even just choosing to ignore or subvert certain rules. Those are all forms of countercontrol.
That's empowering. It means we're not just passive recipients of whatever the government decides. We have the power to shape those decisions and hold those in power accountable.
Exactly, and historically, some of the most significant social changes have come about through those acts of countercontrol.
Yeah.
People challenging the status quo and demanding something better.
It makes me think about the civil rights movement, for example.
Yeah.
People risked their lives to fight for equality, to challenge the unjust laws and social norms of their time.
Exactly, and those movements didn't just happen overnight. They took years of organizing, strategizing,
Right.
and applying pressure on those in power. And a lot of those strategies, whether they realized it or not, were rooted in behavioral principles.
Wow, I never thought about it that way before. So those activists were kind of like ABA practitioners on a massive scale,
In a way, yes.
using their understanding of behavior change to influence the entire system.
They were identifying the reinforcers that were maintaining the status quo, the punishments that were being used to suppress dissent, and they were working to shift those contingencies
Wow.
to create a new set of rules that were more just and equitable.
That's incredible. Like they were hacking the system from the inside out.
Exactly, and that's what's so exciting about applying ABA principles to these larger societal issues. It gives us a framework for understanding how change happens, and it empowers us to be part of that change.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges of applying behavioral principles on a large scale, and we've seen how countercontrol could be a powerful force for social change.
Right.
But what does this all mean for ABA professionals? Where do we fit into this big picture?
That's a great question, and one that I think a lot of us are grappling with. On the one hand, we have this incredible set of tools for understanding and changing behavior.
Right.
Tools that have been proven effective in countless settings. But on the other hand, we're often working within systems that are resistant to change. Systems that are built on outdated assumptions about human behavior or that prioritize control over individual autonomy.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah,
Trying to use our expertise to make a positive difference while also navigating the complexities and sometimes limitations of these larger systems.
exactly. And it requires us to think critically about our role. To ask ourselves tough questions about the ethical implications of our work, and to be willing to challenge the status quo when necessary. We can't just blindly apply our techniques without considering the broader context.
It's like we have a responsibility to use our knowledge wisely,
Right.
to be advocates not just for our individual clients, but for the principles of behavior analysis themselves,
Yes.
and for a society that's more just and equitable for everyone.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about finding that sweet spot where we can use our expertise to empower individuals, to influence systems, and to create lasting positive change in the world.
This conversation is really pushing me to think outside the box,
Good.
to see my work as an ABA professional in a whole new light.
That's fantastic to hear, because ultimately that's what we're all striving for, to make a meaningful contribution to the world around us. And I believe that ABA, with its focus on understanding and changing behavior has a vital role to play in shaping a better future.
I'm totally with you on that. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation so far.
Good.
I'm eager to hear more about what those specific contributions might look like. What are some concrete examples of how ABA principles are being used in government and law?
Well, one area where we're seeing some really interesting developments is in criminal justice reform.
Okay.
Traditionally, the focus has been on punishment as a way to deter crime, but more and more we're seeing a shift toward using behavioral principles to address the underlying factors that contribute to criminal behavior.
That makes sense if you can understand why someone is engaging in criminal behavior.
Right.
You have a better chance of helping them change those patterns, but how does that actually work in practice?
Take some example programs that use functional behavior assessments to identify the triggers for criminal behavior.
Okay.
Once those triggers are identified, you can develop interventions that target those specific needs. It might involve things like teaching anger management skills, providing job training, or connecting individuals with mental health services.
So instead of just locking someone up and hoping they'll learn their lesson,
Right.
you're actually addressing the root causes of their behavior that seems much more likely to lead to lasting change.
Exactly. And there's growing evidence to support that studies have shown that these types of programs can significantly reduce recidivism rates, which means fewer people ending up back in prison.
That's a huge win, both for the individuals involved and for society as a whole. Are there other areas where we're seeing this kind of shift towards a more behavior analytic approach?
Absolutely. Public health is another great example. We know that many health problems are caused or exacerbated by preventable behaviors.
Right.
Things like smoking, unhealthy eating, or lack of exercise. And governments are increasingly using behavioral principles to encourage healthier choices.
I could see that there are all sorts of public awareness campaigns about the dangers of smoking or the benefits of exercise, but are those really effective?
Oh.
I mean, people know smoking is bad for them, but they still do it.
That's true. Knowledge alone isn't always enough to change behavior.
Right.
But when you combine information with strategies that target the specific reinforcers for unhealthy behaviors, you can start to see real change.
So what would that look like? How do you target the reinforcers for something like smoking?
Well, one approach is to increase the cost of cigarettes through taxes that makes the behavior less reinforcing from a financial standpoint.
Okay.
You can also make it more difficult to smoke in public places, which reduces the social reinforcement aspect.
I see. So you're making it less appealing and more inconvenient to engage in the unhealthy behavior? But what about rewarding people for making healthy choices?
That's another effective strategy. Some health insurance companies now offer discounts to members who participate in wellness programs or meet certain health goals.
Oh, okay.
There are also programs that incentivize healthy eating by offering discounts on fruits and vegetables.
It's like applying those principles of positive reinforcement on a societal level, rewarding people for taking care of themselves. I love that.
Me too. And there are so many other areas where these principles could be applied. Think about environmental protection, promoting civic engagement, even designing more user-friendly public spaces. The possibilities are really endless.
This is so inspiring. It's making me think about how much potential there is for ABA professionals to make a real difference in the world beyond just our traditional roles.
Absolutely. We have a unique set of skills and knowledge that can be incredibly valuable in shaping policies, designing programs, and advocating for systems change. And as more people become aware of the power of behavioral science, I think we're going to see a growing demand for our expertise in these areas.
That's exciting to think about. So what advice would you give to ABA professionals who are interested in exploring these opportunities?
First, I would say be curious.
Okay.
Pay attention to what's happening in the world around you and think about how behavioral principles might be at play. Read articles, attend conferences, and connect with other professionals who are doing this kind of work.
That's great advice. It's about expanding our horizons and seeing the bigger picture.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone network with people outside the field of ABA.
Okay.
Share your knowledge and be an advocate for the ethical and effective application of behavioral science.
It sounds like there's a whole world of possibilities out there waiting to be explored.
There is, and I believe that ABA professionals have a crucial role to play in shaping that world for the better.
This has been such a thought-provoking and inspiring conversation. Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive into the intersection of government law and ABA. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how our field can contribute to creating a more just and equitable society.
It's been my pleasure, and to our listeners, I encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and to think about how you can use your knowledge and skills to make a positive impact in your own communities and beyond.
That's a great message to end on. Until next time. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep applying those ABA principles to make the world a better place.